The Japanese occupation of the Philippines, in Filipino, pananakop ng mga Hapones sa Pilipinas, occurred between 1942 and 1945 when Imperial Japan occupied the Commonwealth of the Philippines during World War II. The Japanese invasion of the Philippines began on December 8, 1941, 10 hours after their attack on Pearl Harbor. American planes were extensively destroyed in the initial Japanese attack, as they had been at Pearl Harbor. The American Asiatic Fleet in the Philippines evacuated to Java on December 12, 1941 due to a lack of air cover. General Douglas MacArthur was ordered to leave Corregidor on the night of March 11, 1942 for Australia, 4,000 kilometers away. The 76,000 starving and sick American and Filipino defenders of Bataan surrendered on April 9, 1942, and were forced to suffer the infamous Bataan Death March, during which 7,000 to 10,000 people died or were murdered. On May 6, the 13,000 survivors on Corregidor surrendered. During the Japanese occupation, the Japanese military authorities immediately began organizing a new government structure in the Philippines. Although the Japanese had promised independence for the islands after occupation, they initially organized a Council of the State, through which they directed civil affairs until October 1943, when they declared the Philippines an independent republic. Most of the Philippine elite, with a few notable exceptions, served under the Japanese. The Puppet Republic was headed by President Jose P. Laurel. Philippine collaboration in puppet government began under George B. Vargas, who was originally appointed by Quezon as the mayor of City of Greater Manila before Quezon departed Manila. The only political party allowed during the occupation was the Japanese organized Kalibapi. During the occupation, most Filipinos remained loyal to the United States, and war crimes committed by forces of the Empire of Japan against surrendered Allied forces and civilians were documented. Throughout the Philippines, more than 1,000 Filipinos composed of mothers, girls, and gay men, some aged 10, were imprisoned, forcibly taken as comfort women, and kept in sexual slavery for Japanese military personnel during the occupation. Each of the Japanese military installations in the Philippines during the occupation had a location where the women were held, which they called a comfort station. One such place where these women were imprisoned was Bahay na Pula. Japan occupied the Philippines for over 3 years until Japan surrendered. The Philippine resistance forces used a highly effective guerrilla campaign to control 60% of the islands, which were primarily forested and mountainous. MacArthur fed them via submarine and dispatched reinforcements and commanders. The Filipino people remained generally loyal to the United States, in part because of the American guarantee of independence, in part because of Japanese mistreatment of Filipinos after the surrender, and in part because the Japanese had forced a large number of Filipinos into work details and placed young Filipino women in brothels. On October 20, 1944, General MacArthur kept his pledge to return to the Philippines. a force of 700 ships and 174,000 troops accompanied the landings on the island of Leyte. The islands of Leyte and Mindoro were cleared of Japanese soldiers until December 1944. Fighting continued until Japan's formal surrender on the 2nd of September 1945. The Imperial Japanese Army conducted a suicide defense of the islands during the campaign. Cities like Manila were reduced to ruins. The Philippines had suffered great loss of life and tremendous physical destruction by the time the war was over. Filipino deaths during the occupations are estimated to be around 527,000. 27,000 military dead, 141,000 massacred, 22,500 forced labor deaths, and 336,500 deaths due to war-related famine. Why was the Japanese period considered as a dark period for Philippine literature in English? Japanese period has been called one of the darkest days in the history and literary tradition of the Philippines. The stride and growth of the Philippine literature in English language and the development of Philippine literature in general was interrupted during the Japanese colonial period. The Japanese censored all publications except Tribune and Philippine Review. During the Japanese period, Philippine literature in English was stopped, and writers turned to writing in Filipino. The Japanese authorities, with extreme hate to the Americans, did their best to turn the Filipinos' sympathy away from them. They rewarded the Filipinos who were faithful to them handsomely. In prose literature, the weekly Liwayway magazine was put into strict surveillance and was managed by a Japanese named Ishiwara. The Japanese language Nippongo was introduced by not well embraced by the Filipinos despite it being forcefully taught by the Japanese. However, the good thing is that because of the prohibition on writing literary pieces in English, Filipino literature has received a reprieve. Many Filipino writers created works in Tagalog and other vernacular languages, such as plays, poems, and short tales. Topics and themes frequently revolve on life in the provinces to escape Japanese control and censorship. The Japanese contribution in Philippine educational system. Japanese educational policies were embodied in Military Order No. 2 in 1942. The Philippine Executive Commission established the Commission of Education, Health, and Public Welfare, and schools were reopened in June 1942. The Commission of Education, Health, and Public Welfare was the official name of the department during that time, but now it's the Department of Education. Also, the official titular head was called Commissioner, now Secretary. On October 14, 1943, the Japanese-sponsored republic created the Ministry of Education. So, the official titular head was changed into minister. Under the Japanese regime, the teaching of Tagalog, Philippine history, and character education was reserved for Filipinos. Love for work and dignity of labor was emphasized.
Now let's move on to the destination highlighting in Japanese colonial period.
Japanese colonization of the country began on December 8, 1941, when they dominated Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, as well as American bases in Davao, Cavite, Baguio, and Zambales. On December 26, General Douglas MacArthur declared Manila an open city. However, the two destinations that I chose are the Japanese Tunnel and Leyte Landing Monument.
Now, let's talk first about the first destination, which is the Japanese Tunnel, where it is located in Davao, Mindanao.
The landowners discovered the 300-meter-long tunnel while excavating the area in preparation for the construction of a hotel. Inside the tunnel, passageways, rooms, armaments, and other artifacts were discovered. It was later confirmed that the tunnel was dug by war prisoners under the orders of the Japanese Imperial Army during World War II. However, the items discovered inside the soldiers to seek cover while being pursued by the American Liberating Army. The tunnel was also used as the former invaders' headquarters, with small chambers used as offices and dungeons for prisoners where vintage guns, explosives, and ammo were also discovered inside the tunnel, indicating that it was also used as an armory. In addition to the tunnel, there is a restaurant and an inn that you should visit, and before you begin exploring the tunnel, you will notice some beautiful Japanese World War II statues, Japanese soldiers, and Japanese women dressed in traditional kimono. Now let's proceed to more information about this destination. The Japanese Tunnel is located in Hillcrest Subdivision, Matina, Balusong, Davao City, along the South Diversion Road. It is about 30 minutes by car from downtown Davao. The resort is easy to spot. A concrete inscription with the resort's name is placed on a steep slope near the hotel rooms. Some city tours operators include the tunnel in their itineraries, and if you're visiting the attractions on your own, you can take a taxi from any location in the city. A one-way trip from downtown Davao should not cost you more than 200 pesos. Also, guests can already explore the tunnel through a guided tour for 50 pesos. And take note, the guides are not very knowledgeable and sound like they are reading from script. But two life-size statues of Japanese soldiers stand guard at the tunnel's entrance, seemingly welcoming visitors into their lair. Inside the tunnel, there are several more statues of these soldiers and women dressed in traditional Japanese kimonos. Moreover, inside the tunnel, vintage weaponry such as bullets, rifles, and machine guns are also on display. Deeper into the tunnel, there are also makeshift offices, dungeons, and water bunkers. There are also small chapels, one of which house gold bar replicas as well as the famous Golden Buddha, as well as a hotel and restaurant that you can also enjoy when you visit the Japanese Tunnel. So those who want to stay in the area can book any of the 3-story hotel's rooms where guests can already enjoy well-appointed accommodations, wireless internet access, and an outdoor pool at a reasonable price. The pool is a popular location for children's parties and small events, and the property's restaurant is making a name for itself by serving some of the best Japanese, Western, Filipino, and Chinese cuisine in the city. There is also a coffee shop with a relaxing atmosphere and excellent booze.
Now let's move on to Leyte Landing Monument.
While in Leyte Landing Monument, it commemorates a vital point in the Battle of Leyte during the World War II when American forces landed. The Leyte Landing Monument is located on Red Beach in Palau, Philippines, where General Douglas MacArthur led American liberation troops. However, the Allied forces led by General Douglas MacArthur landed in Leyte on October 20, 1944, at the MacArthur Landing Memorial Park in Palo Beach. And the monument also serves as a reminder of MacArthur's iconic words and promise, "I shall return." The start of the Leyte invasion and his campaign to liberate the Philippines from Japanese occupation during World War II fulfilled the promise. When U.S. forces were forced to leave the Philippines in December 1941, control of the area was handed over to the invading Japanese.
General Douglas MacArthur, Philippine President Sergio Osmeña, Lieutenant General Richard Sutherland, Brigadier General Carlos P. Romulo, Major General Courtney Whitney, Sergeant Francisco Salveron, and CBS radio correspondent William J. Dunn are among the 7 bronze statues at Leyte Landing. Today, the Leyte Landing Monument brilliantly depicts the moment General MacArthur waded through the water with his men on October 20, 1944.
It is a part of the Leyte Landing Monument Park, which was formerly known as MacArthur Memorial Park or Imelda Park. Furthermore, to get there from downtown Tacloban, take a Campitec-bound multicab or a jeepney bound for Palo, Tolosa, or Dulag and get off at Campitec Junction for 10 pesos per person, while from the junction, jeepneys and pedicabs can take you to the Leyte Landing Monument for 10 pesos per person.
I am authorized and directed by the President of the United States to proclaim the independence of the Philippines as a separate and self-governing nation.
The Philippines was colonized for centuries by Japanese, Spaniards, and Americans, which brought sudden changes and chaos to the lives of the early Filipinos. Killings, bombings, inhumane acts, and injustices is widely seen. However, these people have no enough power and influence to protect the country. Each of these colonizers has their own reasons and goal for colonizing the Philippines, which include the education. The educational system of the Philippines was patterned in Spain and the United States after the liberation in 1946. It was divided into 3 categories: the primary, secondary, and the tertiary serving of vocational and formal courses, public, private, and trade school are also present in the present educational system serving our native language, which is Filipino, together with other foreign languages depending on what the students take or what courses the students take. After the liberation of the Philippines, the goal of education is to aspire students to attain democratic realization of the learners and the good way of life.
Another one is to appreciate Philippine culture, preservation of cultural heritage, character education, usage of Filipino books and literature, citizens' increased self-awareness, bilingualism, and greater skills specialization. These include the compulsory daily flag ceremony while singing the national anthem under Republic Act 1265. All schools are also required to include and teach the work and lives of our Rizal, specifically Noli Me Tangere and El Filibusterismo. This is to highlight the challenges of every Filipino and various colonizers.
During this time, the civil service eligibility of teachers was permanently administered on June 15, 1954 under the Republic Act 1079. Magna Carta for Teachers pursuant RA 4670 are also implemented, which includes the rights of every teacher, protecting themselves from unreasonable mistreatment of anyone. And lastly, the Board of Professional Teachers are also established.
The culture of the Philippines is a combination of the culture of the East-West Filipino identity was created primarily as a result of pre-colonial cultures, colonial influences, and foreign traders intermixing and gradually evolving together in pre-colonial times. The Philippines was divided into a set of nations, islands, tribes, and ruled by their own kings, lakans, rahas, datus, and sultans.
Architecture. Number one example is the nipa hut, the common form of housing among the native Filipinos and characterized by the use of a simple material such as bamboo and coconut as the main source of wood. The Spanish architect has left an imprint in the Philippines in the way many towns were designed around Central Square or Plaza Mayor, but many of the buildings bearing its influence were demolished during World War II, like San Agustin Church in Manila.
Shortly after the World War II, Ferdinand Emmanuel Edralin Marcos became the 6th President of the Third Republic of the Philippines. During his presidency, the importance given to science grew as he declared that the advancements of science and technology shall have priority in national development. World Health Organization, the membership of the Philippines in WHO or WHO, provide opportunity for health services afforded by a number of citizens. Philippine Heart Center established in 1975, Presidential Decree No. 633 specializing in the treatment of heart ailments. Lung Center of the Philippines, Presidential Decree Number 1823 was established to cure and prevent lung and chest diseases that receive budget support from the national development. San Juanico Bridge, and it is said to be the longest bridge in the Philippines. The bridge is also known as a symbol of love by Warainans, which connects the sister islands of Samar and Leyte. The 4-year construction of San Juanico Bridge started in 1969, with a total length of 2.16 kilometers, and it is the longest bridge in the Philippines spanning a body of seawater. In 1968, the Philippines became self-sufficient in rice, which supported rice worth $7 million. The North Luzon Expressway, or the NLE or NLEX, built in 1960, formerly known as the North Diversion Road and Manila North Expressway. It is a 4 to 8 lane limited access toll expressway that connects Metro Manila to the provinces of the Central Luzon region in the Philippines.
On July 4, 1946, the Philippines Third Republic was established. It marked the end of peaceful campaign for Philippine independence, which included the passage of the Jones Law in 1916 and the Philippine Independence Act of 1934, or also known as Tidings MacDuffie, which established a 10-year transition period during which the Philippines had Commonwealth status. Thus, the inauguration of the Third Republic marked the culmination of a protracted war for the independence that began on August 23, 1896, with the Philippine Revolution, and culminated on June 12, 1898, with the proclamation of Philippine independence at Kawit, Cavite. The Rojas administration, May 28, 1946 to April 15, 1948.
President Manuel Rojas detailed the challenges the country was facing in the aftermath of the war in his first State of the Nation address. A government without financial means to support even its basic functions, scarcity in commodities, particularly food, hyperinflation, the tragic destruction of productive economy, and instilled ongoing rehabilitation among various sectors of society.
President Rojas reformed the administration and presented a broad legislative agenda to address the country's major socio-economic challenges at the time. The Rehabilitation Finance Corporation, later renamed the Development Bank of the Philippines, was established during the first year of the Third Republic, as was the Department of Foreign Affairs and the Organization of Foreign Service through the Quirino administration, April 17, 1948 to December 30, 1953.
President Elpidio Quirino's first State of the Nation address declared that his objective as president was to restore people's faith in the government and restore peace. To accomplish these goals, the chief executive traveled around the country to assess the country's current state in order to effectively promote the welfare of inhabitants. In rural regions, President Quirino formed the Action Committee on Social Amelioration by Administrative Order No. 68. By Executive Order No. 150, he formed the Social Security Study Commission to study working class socio-economic problems and draft laws to improve social welfare.
Executive Order No. 158 created the Labor Management Advisory Board, which developed labor policy and conducted research on methods to prevent, minimize, and resolve labor conflicts. Republic Act created the Agricultural Credit and Cooperative Financing Administration. Number 821 aided farmers in obtaining finance and forming cooperative societies to more effectively market their agricultural products. The Magsaysay Administration, December 30, 1953 to March 17, 1957.
President Ramon Magsaysay's populist administration focused on assessing the rural population. He formed the Presidential Compliant and Action Commission in his first executive order, which reviewed numerous public complaints and proposed remedial steps through various government departments.
The Social Security Law of 1954, also known as Republic Act No. 1161, was one of Magsaysay's achievements. President Magsaysay sought to protect farmers by passing laws such as the Agricultural Tenancy Act of the Philippines, Republic Act No. 1199, the Land Reform Act of 1955, Republic Act No. 1400, the formation of the Court of Agrarian Relations, Republic Act No. 1267, and the National Resettlement of Rehabilitation's Administration, or the NARA, Republic Act No. 1160. With the surrender of Hawk Commander Luis Tarok in 1954, the administration was able to defeat the insurgents. The Garcia administration, March 18, 1957 to December 30, 1961.
In his inaugural address, President Carlos P. Garcia asked for the people's cooperation and support in carrying out presidency's numerous obligations and continuing the legacy of Magsaysay administration. On September 1, 1957, President Garcia capitalized on the previous administration's social welfare effort by signing the Republic Act 1792, amending the Social Security Law and establishing the Social Security System.
The Garcia government pushed the Filipino First strategy, which centered on regaining economic independence, a national endeavor by Filipinos to achieve large and dominating involvement in their economy, and enforce import and currency controls beneficial to Filipino industries. The austerity program, which President Garcia outlined in his first State of the Nation address as more effort, more thrift, more productive investment, and more efficiency in order to mobilize national savings, was linked to the government's objective of self-sufficiency. The Macapagal Administration, December 30, 1961 to December 30, 1965.
President Diosdado Macapagal stressed the duties and aims to be achieved in the new age. That was the Macapagal administration during his inauguration address on September 30, 1961. He reaffirmed his commitment to fighting corruption and told the people that his presidency will be marked by honesty. President Macapagal too sought for self-sufficiency and the promotion of every citizen's welfare through government-private sector collaboration, as well as poverty alleviation through job creation.
Agricultural Land Reform Code, an act that established the Land Bank of the Philippines. Republic Act No. 3466, which established the Emergency Employment Administration. Republic Act No. 3518, which established the Philippine Veterans Bank, and Republic Act No. 3470, which established the National Cottage Industries Development Authority, or the NACIDA. To organize, revive, and promote cottage industry were among the laws passed during the Macapagal administration. As part of the Decontrol Initiative, the administration relaxed foreign exchange regulation in an effort to foster national economic stability and prosperity. The Marcos administration, December 30, 1965 to February 25, 1986.
President Ferdinand E. Marcos was the last president of the Philippines' Third Republic. Prior to the events of martial law, the Marcos administration concentrated on the revival of the greatness of the nation, as he stated in his inauguration address on December 30, 1965.
Face the problem with government corruption. President Marcos reformed the Armed Forces, the Philippines Constabulary, and the Bureau of Internal Revenue. The Bureau of Customs was also reformed in an attempt to address the problem of technological smuggling. The Cultural Center of the Philippines, or the CCP, was founded in 1969 with the goal of promoting Philippine heritage, culture, and arts.
In 1966, the Philippines hosted the Manila Summit, which was sponsored by Marcos government. The meeting intended to end the Vietnam War and promote economic stability and growth throughout the Asia-Pacific region. The Investment Incentives Act, Republic No. 5186, the Police Act of 1966, and Republic Act No. 5173, which formed the Philippine Coast Guard, were among the legislation signed by President Marcos.
The Plaza Miranda bombing, along with the growing strength of the Communist Party of the Philippines and its military wing, the New People's Army, and the Marcos stage ambush on Secretary of Defense Juan Ponce Enriquez convoy on the night of September 22, 1972, provided the pretext of Marcos' declaration of martial law on September 23, 1972, under Proclamation No. 1081. The proclamation was dated September 21, but it didn't go into force until September 23. Martial law ended across the country in 1981 with Proclamation No. 2045, marking the start of the new or Fourth Republic of the Philippines.
Maria Corazon Cory Sumulong Kuhangko Aquino was a Filipino politician who served as the 11th President of the Philippines from 1986 to 1992. She was the most prominent figure of the 1986 People Power Revolution, which ended the two-decade rule of President Ferdinand Marcos and led to the establishment of the current democratic Fifth Philippine Republic. As a president, Aquino oversaw the drafting of the 1987 Constitution, which limited the powers of the presidency and re-established the bicameral Congress, successfully removing the previous dictatorial government structure. Her economic policies focused on forging good economic standing amongst the international community, as well as establishing Marcos-era crony capitalist monopolies. She also emphasized the free market and responsible economy. Her administration pursued peace talks to resolve the Moro conflict, and the result of these talks was creation of the autonomous region in Muslim Mindanao. Aquino was also criticized for Mindiola massacre, which resulted in the shooting deaths of at least 12 peaceful protesters by the Philippine State Security Forces. The Philippines faced various natural calamities in the latter part of Aquino administration, such as the 1990 Luzon earthquake and tropical storm Telma. It also several coup attempts were made against her government. On March 25, 1986, President Aquino issued Proclamation No. 3, which announced a transitional government into a democratic system. She abolished the 1973 Constitution that was enforced during the martial law era, and by decree issued the provisional 1986 Freedom Constitution, pending the ratification of a more formal and comprehensive charter. This institution allowed her to exercise both executive and legislative powers during the period of transitional government. On February 2, 1987, the Constitution of the Philippines was ratified by nationwide plebiscite. It remains the Constitution of the Philippines to the present day. The Constitution established a Bill of Rights and three-branch government consisting of the Executive Department, the Legislative Department, and the Judicial Department. Fidel V. Ramos, the 12th President of the Philippines from 1992 to 1998, was remembered for steadfastly promoting the principles of people power and global competitiveness. In 1993, he put an end to power crisis that crippled Filipino homes and industry for 2 years. He pursued focus and converged programs to fight poverty in accordance with the will of the Filipino people, expressed by 229 structural reforms laws enacted by Congress during his term. Between 1993 and 1997, the Philippine economy rebounded considerably. Ramos implemented a comprehensive social reform agenda that addressed the long-standing problem of poverty in the following areas: jobs and livelihood, health and education, skills training, housing, environmental protection, children and youth, the elderly and the handicapped, agrarian reform, and equal opportunity access. The country's annual gross national product, or the GNP, averaged 5%. During his presidency, the average Filipino family's income increased more than it had in the 2 previous decades. He advocated for the regulation of important industry and economic reform through an extended of the Build, Operate, Transfer law. Ramos advocates the privatization of public institutions, including the modernization of public infrastructure, while the communist insurrection was an all-time low. He was able to reach an arrangement with the government. Joseph Estrada, also known the Estrada administration, spanned 31 months from June 30, 1998 to January 20, 2001. Estrada was elected President of the Philippines in the May 11, 1998 national elections with almost 11 million votes. Estrada's margin of victory was the one of the largest in the Philippines' electoral history. At his inaugural address in Manila, Estrada promised that his presidency will serve the Filipino people, whose welfare had long been neglected, walang kaibigan, walang kumpare, at walang kamag-anak. He said in his speech, was a harsh warning to anyone attempting to undermine his government by influence peddling. Estrada determined to apply his pro-poor platform to every aspect of government operations, immediately ordered the removal of all sovereign guarantees on public sector contracts, requiring the sovereign Filipino people to bear the financial losses of private companies doing business with the government. Estrada determined to rid the bureaucracy of undesirable elements, ordered the immediate removal of corrupt military and police personnel. He also demanded a thorough probe. Estrada also ordered the investigation of suspected big-time tax evaders, even if some of these individuals had contributed to his presidential campaign. Estrada undertook an aggressive housing program on a national basis, targeting low-cost homes for the poor. The agricultural sector received greater priority, while the national government likewise took steps to bring down the cost of medicine. Foreign investment grew spontaneously, benefiting greatly affect from unsullied and esteemed reputation of the best and brightest chosen to be part of his cabinet, and even more from his reputation as strongly nationalistic yet progressive president. Here are some of the major legislation signed by the president during his term. Philippine Clean Air Act of 1999, or the Republic Act 8749, designed to protect and preserve the environment and ensure the sustainable development of its natural resources. Incentive for regional headquarters of foreign multinationals, or the Republic Act 8756. The measure grants a host of incentives to multinational firms establishing the regional hubs in the country. It also provides a tax and duty-free operating environment for them, and multiple entry visa to expatriates and their family, as well as flat income tax rate of 15%. Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, also known as the Arroyo administration, spanned 9 years from January 20, 2001 to June 30, 2010. She served the remainder of her predecessor, Joseph Estrada term after he was disposed, and she was elected to a full second term in 2004, which ended pursuant to the provision of the 1987 Constitution in 2010. Gloria Macapagal Arroyo assumed the presidency at noon on January 20, 2001, following the EDSA revolution which ousted President Estrada. Upon assumption, she embarked on instituting policies and measures geared toward economic stability and building a strong republic. Being an economist, she laid the groundwork for a robust economy that weathered the global financial meltdown of 2008. As legislator, Arroyo filed over 400 bills and authored or sponsored 55 laws during her tenure as senator, including the Anti-Sexual Harassment Law, the Indigenous Peoples' Rights Law, and the Export Development Act. In 2002, President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo supported the Framework Plan for Women, which aimed to promote women's economic empowerment, protect women's human rights, and encourage and strengthen gender-responsive governance. It served as the government's guide in planning and budgeting for GAD, or programs and projects and activities. During her presidency, the Philippines was among the top countries in the world in terms of gender equity. In fact, President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo was named by Forbes as the fourth most powerful woman in the world in 2005, when then U.S. State Secretary Condoleezza Rice was number 1. In the same year, Philippines became president of the United Nations Security Council, and President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo presided over the UN Security Council summit that was attended by her fellow heads of state, such as President George W. Bush of the US, President Hu Jintao of China, President Haukis Chirac of France, President Vladimir Putin of Russia, and Prime Minister Tony Blair of UK, among others. When he became the 15th President of the Philippines, succeeding Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, Aquino is the third youngest person to be elected president, and the fourth youngest president after Emilio Aguinaldo, Ramon Magsaysay, and Ferdinand Marcos. Aquino signed the Enhanced Basic Education Act of 2013, formally mandating kindergarten and a 12-year basic education curriculum in the country. He signed the Responsible Parenthood and Reproductive Health Act of 2012, which provides universal access to methods of contraception. He launched the Public-Private Partnership Program aimed to hasten infrastructure development. He formed a Truth Commission tasked to investigate various issues, including corruption allegations against his predecessor, President Gloria Macapagal Arroyo. He also signed the Revised Armed Forces of the Philippines Modernization Act, extending the modernization program for another 15 years to continue modernizing all the branches of the military. He signed the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, allowing the United States military to rotate troops into Philippines for extended stays and authorizing the U.S. to build and operate facilities on Philippine bases. Throughout his presidency, Aquino pushed for a bigger role for the private sector in infrastructure development in the Philippines in order to speed up the financing, constructions, and operation of critical infrastructure projects like expressways, airports, and railways that would boost economic activity and growth. On September 9, 2010, Aquino signed Executive Order No. 8 renaming the Build, Operate, and Transfer Center the Public and Private Partnership Center, tasked with facilitating, coordinating, and monitoring all public-private partnership, build, operate, transfer scheme, and private sector participation projects.
U.S. offered the Bill Trade Act in exchange for rehabilitation assistance, which forced the Filipino Congress to amend the 1935 Constitution. That granted the Americans the same rights to the Philippine natural resources and equality of Filipino citizens. Senator Claro M. Recto led the attack on parity rights against the role of the U.S. in the Filipino affairs. The Bell Trade Act was revised through the Laurel-Langley Agreement, an act that shortened full parity rights of Americans in the Philippines. Through the effort of Senator Jose P. Laurel and Lorenzo M. Taneda, the independence of the Philippines was marked by Manuel Rojas taking his oath as a President of Philippines, eliminating the Pledge of Allegiance to the United States required prior to independence. Independence thereafter was celebrated on July 4 of every year until 1962. The independence of the Philippines and inauguration of its Third Republic was marked by Manuel Rojas retaking his oath, eliminating the Pledge of Allegiance to the United States of America, which was required prior to independence. This time, as the first President of the Republic of the Philippines, the Congress of the Commonwealth then became the first Congress of the Republic, and internationally recognition was finally achieved as the government entered into threats with the new republic. In 1962, President Diosdado Macapagal issued Proclamation No. 28 S. 1962, effectively moving the date of the Philippine independence from July 4 to June 12. The date independence from Spain was proclaimed in Emilio Aguinaldo's home in Kawit, Cavite. The Philippines passed through a period of revolutionary turmoil marked by widespread corruption, demoralization, economic crisis, and political terrorism. Credited with restoring peace, law, and order during the Philippine crisis of the 1950s and the Hukbalahap Rebellion. He was the first Philippine president from the land's less lower middle class, the petite bourgeois stratum of society. The annunciation of the Filipino First policy intended to complete the guarantee Filipino economic independence and sovereignty. Diosdado Macapagal introduced the Country First Land Reform Law, placed the peso on the free currency exchange market, and liberalized foreign exchange and import controls. The Philippines regained full control of economy in 1974, 2 years after Ferdinand Marcos Sr. declared martial law. Filipino nationalism decayed after the oust of Marcos and the following administration under Corazon Aquino. The 1987 Constitution made sure that the Filipino citizens and businesses will enjoy full control of the economy, enacting provision that gave restrictive economic measures to foreigners.
By understanding our history, we may engage the present and the future with confidence that whatever mistakes our ancestors made in the past would not be repeated in the present, and we can establish our way of dealing with challenges that are anchored in the wisdom garnered from the past.
There are numerous stories to be found throughout history. Others are chaotic and immoral, while others are motivating and encouraging. We can learn about the construction, operation, and evolution of historical communities, institutions, ideologies, governance, cultures, and technology by studying history.
It is our responsibility and it is our will in protecting and preserving the history that we have. It is evident that with history it's really different, simply because history owns one country, and it helps the development and engaging with our community.
Knowing and learning history can help us gain valuable perspectives on our modern society's problem, since many modern Philippine society's problems, features, and characteristics can be identified back to historical questions about our colonial past as well as our pre-colonial culture.
History molds our future. We have to set in our minds that our history is very important in our society, and the culture, beliefs, and the learnings from our ancestors are significant in our lives. Even the colonizers have an important part in our history and our future.
Learning our history strengthens our sense of nationalism.
It developed our national identity and prevents colonial mentality. History unites us as one and molds us to be responsible Filipino citizens.